You're listening to the Get FireSmart Podcast. Here we learn from FireSmart leaders to discover how we can increase the wildfire resilience of our homes, neighborhoods, and communities. Today's episode is guest hosted by Helena Markin, FireSmart researcher for the First Nations Emergency Services Society of British Columbia. And now it's time to get FireSmart.
Hey, Kara, can you introduce yourself and tell us about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Dr. Kira Hoffman. I am a fire ecologist and fire practitioner, and I'm also an affiliated forester. And my whole research role and personal role is on trying to get as much fire back onto the land as possible in a good way.
So can you share a bit about your background and how you became a fire ecologist?
So for me, fire has always been part of my life. When I was a young kid, kind of my first experience with fire was lighting our fields at our farm. My parents were always like, fire is this healthy thing. It's going to restore the landscape. It's going to be this practice that we're going to do as a family. What was actually ironic about that is that fire got away. And so I remember kind of chasing fire down the field and feeling pretty exhilarated, seeing the power of fire. And then also like a week later, it didn't get too far. It was a good lesson. And a week later, it was just this beautiful green pasture for our horses. And it's just a clear memory of like the beneficial side of fire, the good side of fire.
Why have you dedicated so much of your time and your life to fire? It's been an ever-enduring piece.
Well, I think I was probably born this way. Like most pyrophiles, I think that you just kind of have it in you. And I do think everyone has a little fire in them. But for me, it was just, again, that attraction to fire, that wanting to be around it all the time, wanting to play with it, wanting to kind of control it. I was given a magnifying glass as a child to do science experiments. And the first thing I did was go outside and burn things with it. So I do think that, it's kind of, again, that there's this innate, respect and understanding of fire that I think we all have. It's just maybe some people have a little bit more fear attached to it.
And how did you become interested in Indigenous-led fire stewardship, and how do you support that work through your work in fire ecology?
Sure. So I'm interested in all forms of fire stewardship, Indigenous-led fire stewardship. There's fire stewardship through, ranchers and guide outfitters, through people that are kind of experimenting with it for the first time. To me, Indigenous-led fire stewardship was kind of the only other fire stewardship that I was aware of at that time. It was what I always saw. I'm from northwestern British Columbia. It was the dominant practice, and also, a real example of how you can have this healthy kind of fire that's really good for plants and animals and people. And so it was a really, important part of me learning about fire through kind of adolescence. And then when I went and did my PhD, I actually started studying soil microbes, and digging down into the soil. I just saw all this charcoal, and I'm in one of the wettest places in North America, on the hyper maritime coast, central BC. And there's all this evidence of fire, and I just was so amazed. And of course, it's not lightning. I know enough about fire to be like, well, there's no way the lightning struck this island this many times. I'm looking at 12,000 years of fire history, and there's just fire, 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 fire. And so I think that at that moment, I really understood the incredible experience and knowledge that Indigenous people have with fire. And, that hasn't suffered loss in some places. In some places it has, but in some places it's very continuous. And I think just being kind of amazed by it, and wanting to learn more about it. And through the course of my research, I tried to start fires under supervision with teachers on the Central Coast in those places. And there's no way I could have gotten a fire started the traditional way. And so, I've always been really impressed by people who understand kind of the art and science of fire. but then also have that deep connection to it as well.
Can you describe for listeners a bit more about what cultural and prescribed fire are and why they're so effective?
Sure. So cultural fire has a lot of different definitions, and it really depends on the nation or the community. And so it's not really my place to define it. Prescribed fire to me is just the intentional act of putting fire on the land for a value or multiple values. So when I'm engaging in prescribed fire, I'm doing it because it's super safe. It's really effective at getting the job done. And it's also really cost effective. So it's economic. And most people don't really think about that because the pace at which we've been doing things has been, gradual. But it can be a really, really good tool to mitigate wildfire risk, to, create safe evacuation routes, and also to benefit many of the species that have thrived in British Columbia for so long because it's a fire-dependent ecosystem. And I really mean that most of this province is comprised of fire-adapted or fire-dependent ecosystems.
And what are some of the misconceptions that you hear, especially from the public about prescribed fire, and how does your work kind of, are you working to dispel those?
Yeah, most people don't really have a close connection with fire besides a campfire. And so they don't really understand how safe and calm of place it can be. They see wildfires on the news, these catastrophic events that are forcing people to leave their homes, are losing their livelihoods. People aren't really exposed to those really safe and beautiful and kind of effective fires. Not very many people have had that opportunity. And one thing I'm never really clear about is how to get more people aware of that. The only thing that I can really think of is through education. And so like when we do live fire experiments with kids, like we clear out a parking lot and we burn a hay bale, that's a lot of kids' first experience with something that's not a campfire. And so when we have people out there in that learning environment, it can be a really, really effective way to change their whole perception on fire. But again, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that in an urban setting. I think that the K-7 education and curriculum on why fire is a healthy and integral component of BC's ecosystems would be really beneficial for moving forward.
If we're talking about that bigger wildfire picture and kind of just some of the changes that we've seen looking at wildfires now over, the past many decades, what specific changes are we seeing across Canada's forests and grasslands? And, how does that fire look so different now?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy even to see in my lifespan. So when I think about when I was a firefighter with BC Wildfire, I mean, I had so few firefighting days, and it just was not uncommon to work 2 jobs. Like I worked as a tree planter on the weekends. That is almost unheard of these days because fire consumes your whole summer. People are walking away with 100 fire line days sometimes. 30 fire line days would be a really, really bad fire season. Depending on whose perspective you're coming from. Most people who are in firefighting are looking for fire line days as their livelihood. You were seasonally employed, and so that was going to be kind of your funds through the whole year. You'd have to spread it out. And so now people are kind of dreading having so many fire line days because it takes them away from their family. It creates all sorts of issues with mental health. So I think the increase in the length of the fire season is definitely something that's happening. Catastrophic fire events that are incredibly impactful to human communities is something we just didn't really see that much of in the past. And then also one thing I really see is kind of the shifting baselines. So I was talking to people here and they're like, oh, well, it was so nice we didn't have a really bad fire season last year. We got kind of a break from 2023. And I'm just kind of looking at them. I'm like, well, we lost Jasper. We had significant wildfire events throughout the province. We had drought. We had many communities on evacuation alert. We had Lytton evacuated again. And so we have gotten so used to things being in kind of dire traits, I guess, that we have become kind of normalized to things being extreme. And I think that kind of puts us in a place of stress. And for me, it's like wildfire season's coming, and it's like, oh gosh, better get ready. And then, you barely have enough time to rest in the winter before it's happening again. So even though our burn windows are actually getting longer, we have maybe more opportunities to do things like prescribe and cultural fire. It's becoming more unpredictable. So we have more erratic winds. We are dealing with potentially higher fuel loads than we used to. And things are just a little bit spicier. So you're dealing with flashier fuels that are drier, or sometimes you have the other extreme where you have a year like 2020 and it rains every single day in the summer. And then you have a huge buildup of fuel, and that lag and carries over to the next year. And so then you have even more fuel to deal with. And so there's all these different things that are coming together just to make wildfire seasons more unpredictable. And as a fire ecologist, I'm asked, like right now, the beginning of every fire season, what will this fire season be like? And I have no idea. I mean, I look at snowpack, I look at long-term drought, I look at all these different things, but it can be such a difficult thing to predict.
When you're looking at, I guess, the ecology of this and in your part of the world, what sort of changes are you seeing there, and where exactly is that?
Sure. So most of my research now is based in Northwest British Columbia. So kind of about 4 hours north of Prince George, in a town called Smithers. But I work really in the surrounding subboreal and temperate inland rainforest. And so we have it's not the boreal. It's kind of like if the boreal and the interior dry forest got together and made another forest type that we really don't know that much about. What I'm really seeing when I'm trying to burn, so we have a really strong burn program in that area, and my primary job is to look at fire effects. So what should we burn, when should we burn it, and how should we burn it? What I'm seeing is kind of a phenological fire mismatch. So what happens is we're snow-free earlier, we have buds coming out earlier, the animals are confused about what time of year it is, the people are a little bit confused about what time of year it is, resources are hard to kind of line up for the right windows, and then the fire effects are hard to get because sometimes you're getting vegetation responses like it's spring and it's the burn window, but then your soils are still frozen. Or you're getting the opposite, you're getting green up and the soils are just coming into being ready for burning. And so it can be really, really hard to find the right window for burning when it can be safe, but also when you can actually meet the objectives that you're planning to burn for.
You're saying that the windows are expanding, but it also seems like there's so many things that either indicate it's ready or not ready, and how are you managing that?
By asking people who really know what's going on is usually the answer. So much of the work I do is really focusing on supporting Indigenous knowledge and science, and there is people who really, really know that land. They really know the winds. They really know the water. They really know about the fire. And so I'm very, very fortunate to be learning about some of the signals for burning and some of the signals to not burn as well. And I really try and ground myself in the practice of always trying to ask people when you don't know. And there is so much that we just don't know. There's fire practices we know a lot about. We really know how to control fires. We really know how to light fires. But kind of understanding the long-term impacts and whether or not we're succeeding is hard. And what does success mean? What does it mean for you as a fire ecologist versus you as a community member versus you as, a rancher or a guide outfitter on the land whose the main focus is hunting, the animals that we're trying to increase the productivity for. One thing that's so important in this research and just line of work in general is failing, because we need to know what's working and what isn't working and why. So we constantly come back to our methods, to our monitoring protocols and saying, okay, well, we didn't get that right. Or, wow, I bring in all these instruments and technology to sometimes measure the burn, and sometimes we don't even pick up the burn signature. and I'll be working with a community member, an elder, and they'll be like, I don't think we needed those to tell us that. And I'll be like, yeah, no, you're definitely right there. But for me, sometimes my own personal lessons have been to kind of leave that stuff behind and really just pay attention to what's happening on the day of, not worry too much about, yes, we want to get this right. Yes, we want to kind of have that shared understanding of success, but not at the detriment of not being present on the day of, because we're trying to measure everything.
And that's a good segue into the next question. What are some of the biggest learnings or projects that you're most passionate about, especially as they relate to the communities you've interacted with, if there's any that you can share?
Yeah, I think that the big one for me is just trying to find the right way to measure that success. Because again, success looks so different compared to different people and what their background is. And for me, I really miss kind of the qualitative, the more social aspects of success when I started, because I'm trained as a biophysical scientist. It took me a long time to really understand that there's other measures like intergenerational knowledge exchange, like having your grandparent or grandchild out with you on the fire line. That some of the biggest thing is just in shared learnings or community well-being. Like, how did you feel after the fire? What were some of the sounds that you heard that, or some of the smells? Did they bring back memories? Or where should we be burning that we haven't really thought about before? Because, one of the nations, nation that I work with, my idea was, we'll go and we'll burn in the berry patches where you used to burn. And we talked about it, and they said, no, well, that wouldn't be appropriate. Those berry patches aren't really going to thrive anymore because of the rapidly changing climate. We need to maybe move our berry patches to new places. And that adaptive management and that novel way of thinking about climate, that was a really big learning experience for me. So I've constantly had to kind of change how I think about science, and also just about more experiential ways of kind of connecting to the landscape, which is something we're not really taught. We're not really taught to just go outside and kind of take it all in or learn from your surroundings as much. There's people who are fortunate to be brought up that way, but for many of us, it's not kind of our natural connection.
How are researchers and fire experts collaborating today with Indigenous nations and Indigenous fire practitioners? They have all of that knowledge, and you talked about a lot of those different measures of success and the beautiful qualitative pieces that go into successful burns. So, are there any projects that stand to you on that theme?
There's some great programs across the province right now where there's a lot of researchers that are supporting Indigenous-led fire stewardship, and that's so important, is that First Nations are leading the way. I think that it's important to know that, we all are humans and we all have fire in our DNA. It's what makes us humans. It's what we can connect over. We've all experienced that feeling of being around a campfire together. There's a special kind of feeling like, oh, this feels right. And so, kind of connecting over that shared history of fire, that shared love for fire, but supporting nations in capacity building, supporting nations in, acquiring funding to do the kind of research and monitoring that they want to do, and also finding ways to collaborate together and what can work to kind of learn about the future with fire, because it is our shared future. And how can we support each other? How can we kind of teach that next generation of fire practitioners that are hopefully going to see First Nations leadership through fire in British Columbia and Canada and beyond.
And, looking into future generations, like, what does it mean to be fire adapted in this climate-driven fire landscape?
It means so many different things in so many different places. Like, to me, what does it mean to be fire adapted? It's my children are out burning with me on our property. It's that, they are feeling so much more comfortable with fire than, the generation before and the generation before that. That they are learning about all just the different ways that you can connect with fire, They're kind of understanding the scientific side of things, the social side of things, and also like the future of fire and where it's going. That they're not just seeing wildfire as this devastating thing on the news, that they're seeing those really powerful stories of renewal with fire.
And when we look at communities and residents, noticing that this will be different for absolutely everyone. But how can communities and residents begin incorporating these ideas into their long-term planning or land care? How do we bring fire to everyone?
Well, fire is probably coming to everyone. We just want to make sure it's coming in the way that people are ready for it. One of the things is, trying to make FireSmart equitable. Not everyone has access to harden their homes. I think that the problem is quite obvious with home hardening and the need to do that. But let's say you're a community that's facing, well, should we spend our money on home hardening, or should we spend our money on getting access to clean drinking water, or maybe making an evacuation, another route out of town? Those are really tough decisions. But I think that, what we need is some kind of easy wins for people. Like, if you're going to do one thing, this is what it should be at your home, and it's not going to cost you any money, and we'll come in and do that. I think that having solutions that are free or incentive-based are going to really work. But we're always going to have fire coming into our communities. It's just how you define kind of the success of what comes after. Is it communities having more time to evacuate? Is it structures like critical infrastructure being protected? I think that our future is going to be fiery. If we look in the last 10 years, that's really what we've experienced. And I think that we just need to be more prepared and also build the social fabric to be more prepared for the after effects of fire, because there will be trauma, there will be losses, but the ways that we can prepare beyond home hardening, through that education and kind of understanding fire in a better way is going to be really important.
And what have you been most encouraged by in recent years? There is a lot of doom and gloom about these really difficult seasons, but what are some of those things that have sparked hope for you?
Right now, I'm really encouraged by the conversations that are happening in forestry. I really think that we're at the beginning of a huge shift in how we do forestry in British Columbia, and in a huge shift to doing it in a way that is much more in line with improving resilience to wildfire at the landscape scale. I think that we're seeing shifts in how land is managed for fire, but also for many other values. And I think that there's so many opportunities to do things differently and in a better way. Like, I think that things feel really hopeful for me in that way. I think that there's really people who are ready to move into leadership roles, and First Nations tenure holders are one that I can think of. Community forests is another one. And even though they hold small tenure, they hold important tenure around communities where you can make significant change. And I think that you're going to see a few first adopters take the leap, and then a huge cascading follow of people who want to really plan and prepare for wildfire.
How have you seen attitudes towards fire stewardship shift in recent years? You're talking about these shifts in the forest industry. How have the attitudes also been following that?
Well, I think that just in general, conversations about prescribed and cultural fire have really, really started and accelerated over the last few years. I mean, when I think about, again, being in BC Wildfire 20 years ago, I did not really partake in any prescribed burns. A few, yes, but I wasn't trained that way. There was no conversations about, hey, could we do this a little bit differently? Or is there other ways to manage the forest? And so I think that things have really changed, and actually pretty quickly. So over the last 20 years, I think we've all started to have conversations about how we can do things differently. And, who are the leaders that are doing differently and have been doing things differently for millennia. And so that's, we can look to First Nations expertise on that, about, different ways of managing the land.
And, shifting gears, congratulations on receiving the Lynn Orstad Award. What does this recognition represent for you and your field?
Well, it's really nice to be recognized for an award. Being a woman in fire has not always been the easiest thing. There was many challenging years that I had in just being recognized as a scientist, and especially as a woman. I've had such strong women mentors that have gotten to me to this place, and just recognizing them is so important. And so it means a lot to me because I have the opportunity to kind of step into their shoes and start mentoring myself. And, whether that's grad students or community volunteers, or my own daughter, I'm so excited to be just filling that role. And I've been taught by the best. And so hopefully I'll just do, half of what they did and it'll be a workout. Yeah.
And what keeps you motivated pushing forward in this work?
Well, again, it goes back to just my love of fire. I have, about 100 years of fire things to learn in my short life here. So I better get to it. I'm never bored in fire. There's so much to know. And also, there's so much not to know about fire. It's kind of this mysterious entity that, I don't know, fire is kind of this, mystery. And it will always be unexpected and it will always be enigmatic. But that's kind of what keeps me up at night, keeps me really passionate to be doing this work. And it's what I know I'm kind of meant to be doing.
What's one thing every listener should take away about living with wildfire in the era of climate change?
If people could do one thing, I think it would be just to question their fear of fire. Question, why they feel that way. And, if there is reason for that, if they've had, trauma associated with evacuations or, losing homes and infrastructure, those kinds of things, then, taking the time to kind of work through them if you can. Because most people in British Columbia are going to experience, if they haven't already, an evacuation, or they're going to know someone who has, or a disrupted, wedding or family vacation, or all of these things are going to kind of impact our social lives, our personal lives, our family lives. And so taking the time to know fire and question fire and try to understand it, I think will be really helpful with moving forward, because British Columbia, again, is a fire-adapted, fire-dependent landscape, and we're living here. We owe it to fire to kind of understand it a little bit more, and make better decisions, or decisions we can make with what we have, our collective capacity to kind of, again, live with fire in a better way.
On that note, what's one practical thing that individuals or communities can do to contribute to fire resilience?
I really like the idea of just getting to know a neighbor, having conversations about fire. Hey, have you considered your hedge might be somewhat flammable? Or, hey, do you have an evacuation plan? Or do you have any medical concerns, where you're going to need more time? Just starting those conversations with neighbors is really, really helpful. If you know a firefighter, just stop in to chat with them. Say, hey, how's it going? Because they've been dealing with a lot these last few years, and acknowledging the really, really hard work they do, the time spent away from families, the health impacts of fighting fire. Just want to kind of recognize that. And so just checking in on our community, checking in on neighbors, checking in on friends, making plans. That's the one thing that I can think of to kind of, again, strengthen relationships moving forward.
Where can people learn more about your work or support Indigenous-led fire initiatives?
There's some really good resources. There's Indigenous FireSmart, which is the book that Dr. Amy Cardinal-Christensen co-wrote and authored about how to prepare Indigenous communities. It's a great resource. There's FireSmart coordinators in local municipalities and regional districts that can support homeowners in finding the best fit for them for home hardening. Talking to municipal fire departments and getting to know wildland firefighters in your area is always super helpful. My work can be found, online. I write a lot of papers, unfortunately, that not a lot of people read. But I'm trying to, again, do more outreach like this so that people can kind of understand that there is a lot of intention and, I guess, key things that they can do from that research, that it's not just sitting on a shelf. And as a practitioner out there doing the burning, I go to classes, and that's kind of the best way that people can find me is in my natural setting on the fire line, trying to support getting fire back on the land.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kara, on the Get FireSmart podcast.
Thanks for having me.